The sun cast golden rays over the sprawling mansion, its polished windows reflecting the grandeur inside. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, and the scent of fresh-cut roses lingered in the air. The world saw this place as a testament to success and happiness, a dream carefully cultivated by Michael and Rachel. Michael, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, checked his reflection in the mirror. He straightened his cufflinks, a faint smile of satisfaction on his lips. To him, life was about milestones, goals achieved, and symbols of prosperity. He turned to Rachel, who was standing by the window, her slender frame silhouetted against the morning light. "You know, Rach," he said, his voice warm, "every time I look at this place, I feel proud. We've built something incredible together." Rachel turned slowly, her eyes masked with a practiced softness. "Yes, it is beautiful," she replied. Her voice was gentle, yet there was an absence of emotion, a hollow echo in a cavern too deep for Michael to hear. Michael stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I do all of this for us. For you. I want us to have everything we've ever dreamed of." She nodded, the smile on her lips thin and fragile. "I know, Michael. You work so hard. But sometimes," he continued, oblivious to the tremor in her voice, "I wonder if I'm spending enough time with you. Once this new deal goes through, I promise we'll take that vacation. Just the two of us." Rachel's gaze flickered briefly with something unreadable. Regret, perhaps, or resignation. "Of course. I'd like that." Michael's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. "It's the office. I need to take this." He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly before stepping out onto the balcony to answer the call. The door slid shut behind him with a soft thud. Rachel watched his back, the man who loved her in his own way, but never quite saw her. She turned to the ornate mirror on the wall. The woman who stared back was beautiful, poised, and utterly hollow. Later that evening, they hosted a dinner party for Michael's associates. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Rachel moved gracefully through the crowd, smiling and exchanging pleasantries. To everyone else, she was the perfect hostess, a woman who had it all. As she poured wine into a guest's glass, she caught sight of Terry standing in the corner. His eyes locked on her with a smirk that sent a thrill up her spine. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with a dangerous excitement. She walked over to him, her smile composed. "Terry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you shouldn't be here tonight." His eyes glinted mischievously. "Why not? I thought you liked living on the edge." Rachel glanced around to ensure no one was watching. "You know the rules. We can't afford mistakes." Terry leaned in, his voice low and teasing. "Mistakes are what make life interesting." Rachel's smile faltered for just a second before she forced it back into place. "Go home, Terry. We'll talk later." He chuckled and brushed past her, leaving a whisper of temptation in his wake. Rachel took a steadying breath, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She turned back to the room, slipping effortlessly into her role once more. The illusion of perfection remained intact, but the cracks were there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to shatter the facade. The moon hung high over the city, casting silvery beams over the empty parking lot. A chill wind rustled through the shadows, but Rachel barely noticed. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest, the cold air biting at her skin. Beside her, Terry leaned casually against a streetlight, a sly grin on his face. "Are you sure about this, Rach?" Terry's voice was low, his words dripping with a mixture of excitement and danger. "Once we go through with it, there's no turning back." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I know what I'm doing, Terry. I've thought it through." He chuckled, his eyes glinting under the pale light. "You always do. That's what I like about you. Calculated, precise, ruthless." She shot him a sharp glance. "This isn't a game. This is our future. My future." Her voice wavered, betraying a flicker of the desperation that gnawed at her from within. Terry pushed off the streetlight and closed the space between them, his fingertips grazing her cheek. Hey, relax. He won't know what hit him. Just a tragic accident. Everyone will think it's fate, and we'll be sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere. Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the empty lot. The weight of her decision settled like a stone in her stomach. I can't live like this anymore. I can't be a trophy on a shelf, collecting dust while he plays the hero of his own story. Terry's fingers trailed down to her chin, lifting her face to his. You deserve more. We deserve more. And Michael's just too blind to see it. She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, the softness was gone, replaced by steely resolve. The brakes will fail on his way to that meeting. No one will question it. He drives too fast anyway. It'll just look like he lost control. Terry's grin widened. Perfect. And with him out of the way, everything he's worked for will be ours. Rachel turned away, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the city's lights shimmered like distant stars. He talks about sharing his success, but it's all about him. He thinks he's building a life for us, but I'm just trapped in his shadow. Terry's hand slipped around her waist, pulling her closer. Not for long. A few nights later, the mansion was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. Rachel paced the marble floors of the living room, each step echoing like a drumbeat of her impending betrayal. Terry lounged on the sofa, his legs stretched out, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Everything set for tomorrow? He asked, his voice casual. Rachel stopped pacing and looked at him. Her eyes narrowed. Yes. The car's ready. I made sure the damage to the brakes won't be noticed until it's too late. He whistled low. You're something else, you know that. She didn't smile. This isn't something to admire. It's something that has to be done. Terry leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Don't start second-guessing now. I'm not, she snapped, then took a breath to steady herself. I just need to make sure nothing goes wrong. One mistake, and we lose everything. He stood and crossed the room, taking her hands in his. Trust me, Rach. We've got this. Michael will be gone, and we'll be free. Together. She met his gaze, searching for reassurance she wasn't sure he could give. I'm trusting you, Terry. Don't let me down. He smirked. I never do. But as the word hung between them, Rachel's mind churned with doubts she couldn't voice. The web they'd spun was intricate, but it was also delicate. One wrong move, one stray thread, and everything would come crashing down. Outside the mansion, hidden by the shadows of the garden, William crouched low, his small frame trembling with cold and fear. His wide eyes stared through the window, catching the faint glint of Rachel's wedding ring as she clasped Terry's hands. They're going to kill him, William thought, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand everything the adults were saying, but the intent was clear, and it chilled him to the bone. He knew he had to do something, but how could a boy like him stop something so monstrous? He wrapped his arms around himself, whispering to the wind, I have to try. Someone has to try. The web of betrayal was nearly complete, but a small unseen thread, a boy's fragile courage, threatened to unravel it all. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp pavement and decay through the city streets. The parking lot was dimly lit by flickering streetlights, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and writhe in the darkness. Amid the forgotten trash and oil stains, a small figure crouched low behind a rusting dumpster. William hugged his knees to his chest, his thin hoodie barely keeping out the cold. The boy was no stranger to the shadows. They had become his refuge since life had cast him aside. But tonight, the shadows held a secret he could scarcely believe. His breath came out in short, silent puffs as he strained to hear the conversation unfolding just a few feet away. Rachel's voice was low but intense. The brakes are set. By the time he realizes something's wrong, it'll be too late. Terry chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. Good. He's got no idea, does he? All wrapped up in his precious work, thinking he's untouchable. William's eyes widened, his heart thundering in his chest. He didn't understand all the words, but the meaning was clear. Someone was going to die, and these people, these elegant, well-dressed adults, were planning it. He clamped his hands over his mouth to stifle a gasp, his mind spinning. He couldn't tear his eyes away from them, especially from the woman. Her face was beautiful, cold, and empty, like a doll's. How could someone who looked so perfect be talking about killing someone? "Make sure everything goes smoothly," Rachel said, her voice clipped, precise. "We've come too far to mess this up." Terry leaned in, his grin predatory. "Relax. He won't know what hit him. And by the time anyone figures it out, we'll be long gone, with his fortune." William's stomach twisted. He knew the feeling of desperation all too well. The clawing hunger, the need to survive. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. It was about greed. About taking a life to gain something more. The voices faded, their footsteps echoing into the night as Rachel and Terry walked away, satisfied with their deadly plan. William stayed frozen in his hiding spot, his breath ragged, his limbs trembling. "What do I do?" he thought, panic bubbling up inside him. He was just a boy, dirty, hungry, invisible to the world. How could he stop something so monstrous? He peered out from behind the dumpster, watching as Rachel slid gracefully into a sleek black car. The engine purred to life, and the taillights disappeared into the darkness. William's fingers dug into his palms. He had seen too much to walk away. His mind screamed at him to run, to pretend he hadn't heard anything, to go back to the alleys and cardboard boxes that sheltered him. But his heart, the tiny, defiant part of him that still believed in right and wrong, refused. "I can't let them kill him," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He thought of the man they were talking about. Someone who had no idea death was coming for him. A stranger, yes, but a life was a life. And William knew what it felt like to be helpless, to wish that someone, anyone, would care enough to step in. His resolve hardened. He had to try. Hours later, William found himself standing at the edge of a pristine, manicured lawn. The mansion loomed before him, its windows glowing warmly against the night. It was a world so different from his own, one he'd only ever glimpsed through glass. He hesitated, his heart pounding. "They'll never listen to me," he thought. "I'm just a street kid." But the image of Rachel's cold, calculating eyes flashed through his mind. He couldn't let fear win. Taking a shaky breath, he crept closer, his feet silent on the soft grass. He found a dense hedge near the front door and slipped behind it, shivering in the early dawn chill. He'd wait. He had to see the man before he left. He had to try to warn him. As the first light of dawn kissed the sky, the mansion's front door opened. William's eyes snapped to attention as he saw a tall man step out, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked important, powerful, but also distracted. His brow was furrowed, his gaze already focused on his car parked in the driveway. That's him, William realized. Michael. Summoning every ounce of courage he had, William darted out from the hedge and stumbled onto the driveway. "Wait. Wait, mister." Michael stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing at the disheveled boy before him. His voice was sharp, edged with suspicion. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" William swallowed, his throat dry. You can't drive that car. They messed with the brakes. It's gonna crash." Michael's eyes flickered with irritation. "What are you talking about? Who messed with my car?" "Your wife," William blurted out, the words rushing out in a breathless tumble. "And the man she's with. They said they were gonna make it look like an accident." Michael's face went pale, his jaw tightening. He took a step back, his eyes darting between the boy and the car. For a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then he let out a slow breath. "This is ridiculous. Please," William's voice cracked. "I'm not lying. Just just check the car. Please." Something in the boy's eyes, raw, desperate, and impossibly sincere, gave Michael pause. His instincts as a businessman told him to dismiss the boy. But a chill crept down his spine, a whisper of something darker. Without a word, he walked to the car and knelt down, examining the brakes. Seconds ticked by like hours. Then he froze. His fingers traced the jagged edge where the brake line had been deliberately cut. His blood turned to ice. "My God," he whispered, the truth crashing into him like a wave. He turned back to William, his voice trembling. "You were right." William exhaled, relief and fear mingling in his chest. "I told you. I had to warn you." Michael stood, his eyes hardening with resolve. He looked at the boy who had saved his life, a boy who had nothing to gain, yet risked everything. His voice softened. "You did more than warn me. You saved me." William's shoulders sagged. For the first time in a long while, someone believed him. And Michael knew, in that moment, that this boy was the key to unraveling the web of betrayal that had almost consumed him. The first rays of dawn stretched over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pale gold and muted lavender. The air was cold and sharp, biting through William's threadbare hoodie as he stood shivering outside the gates of Michael's mansion. His fingers were numb, his legs aching from standing in the shadows for hours. But he couldn't leave. Not now. The mansion loomed before him, tall, imposing, a symbol of everything he'd never had. William's heart pounded in his chest. Doubt crept in, whispering that he was wasting his time. What if Michael didn't believe him? What if he was sent away, dismissed as a dirty street kid with a wild imagination? But every time those doubts grew too loud, he remembered Rachel's cold, precise voice and Terry's sinister grin. The image of a car spinning out of control, of shattered glass and twisted metal, burned in his mind. He clenched his fists. "I have to do this. He deserves to know." The sound of a door opening jolted him from his thoughts. He watched as Michael stepped out onto the driveway, dressed in an elegant suit, his shoes polished to a shine. He looked every bit the successful businessman, confident, composed, and completely unaware of the danger lurking just beneath the surface of his life. Michael paused to glance at his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. His mind was already consumed with the day ahead, with meetings, deals, and numbers. The last thing he expected was for a filthy boy to come stumbling out of the shadows. But William had no choice. "Wait. Please, wait." William's voice cracked, a mixture of fear and desperation. He lurched forward, his feet skidding on the smooth pavement. Michael froze, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the scruffy, underfed boy standing at the edge of his driveway. His first instinct was to call security. He took a step back, his tone sharp. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" William's breath came in short gasps. You can't drive that car." They messed with the brakes. Michael's gaze hardened. What are you talking about?" "Please." William's voice wavered, panic bubbling to the surface. "Your wife and her friend. They said they were gonna make it look like an accident. They want you dead." Michael's eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He glanced over his shoulder at the sleek black car parked in the driveway, then back at William. His jaw tightened. "This is insane. Do you know what you're saying?" William swallowed hard, his eyes pleading. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not lying. I heard them. They're going to kill you." Michael's face remained stony. "You expect me to believe that my wife, Rachel, is plotting to kill me?" William's voice trembled, but he refused to back down. "Yes, I know how it sounds, but I swear it's true. Just check the brakes. Please, just check." For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence. Michael's gaze bore into William's, searching for any hint of deception. All he saw was raw, desperate honesty. and a fear too real to be faked. He let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders evident. "Fine. I'll check. But if you're lying, you'll regret wasting my time." Michael strode to the car, his footsteps brisk, each one echoing with doubt and dread. William stayed where he was, his knees shaking, his hands clammy with sweat. He clenched his teeth, praying that Michael would see the truth before it was too late. Michael knelt beside the car, running his hand along the underside of the chassis. His fingers traced the brake line, his mind prepared to dismiss the boy's wild claim. But then his hand froze. A chill ran down his spine. There, hidden from casual view, was a jagged tear in the brake line. The cut was clean, deliberate, a death sentence waiting to be carried out. His breath caught in his throat. Dear God. He stood up slowly, his face pale. He turned to look at William, who was standing on the edge of the driveway, his eyes wide with anxiety. "You were telling the truth," Michael whispered, the words feeling heavy and surreal. William nodded, his voice small. "I told you. I couldn't just let it happen." Michael's mind raced. He thought of Rachel, her smile, her gentle touch, her words of love, and felt his stomach churn. Behind that facade, betrayal had festered, and Terry, his own brother. The realization left him hollow and sick. He walked back to William, his steps slower now, weighed down by the truth. He crouched down to the boy's level, his eyes filled with gratitude and pain. "You saved my life," he said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." William shifted uncomfortably, his cheeks flushing. I couldn't let them do it. I know what it's like to feel like no one cares." Michael's jaw tightened, a wave of guilt washing over him. He really saw, the boy before him. Malnourished, dirty, alone. A child who had risked everything to save a stranger. He reached out a hand. "Come inside. We need to talk. And you look like you could use a meal." William hesitated, his eyes darting toward the mansion. "I don't want to cause trouble." Michael's voice was firm but kind. "You're not. You've already done more than I can ever repay." The boy nodded, and Michael stood, leading him toward the house. The weight of betrayal still hung in the air, but it was tempered by a newfound determination. Rachel and Terry had woven their web of deceit, but thanks to a boy in the shadows, the threads were beginning to unravel. The battle wasn't over yet, but now Michael was ready, and he wasn't alone. The glow of dawn was long gone, replaced by the harsh brilliance of midday. The mansion felt colder, emptier. Michael sat in his study, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his chest. He stared at the whiskey glass in his hand, the amber liquid trembling as he gripped the crystal tighter. The realization that his wife and brother had plotted his death was a bitter poison, and the antidote could only be found in action. Across from him, William sat on the edge of a plush leather chair, his feet barely touching the floor. He watched Michael with wide, cautious eyes, unsure of what came next. He'd done his part, warned Michael, stopped the disaster. But now he felt out of place in this luxurious, intimidating room. Michael set the glass down with a decisive clink, his jaw clenched. He looked at William, his eyes softer than they had been all morning. "William," he said, his voice low but steady, "I can't let them get away with this. But I need your help." William's eyes widened. "Me? What can I do? I'm just a kid." Michael shook his head. "You're not just a kid. You're brave, resourceful, and you care about doing what's right. That's more than I can say for most adults I know." William fidgeted, his cheeks flushing. I didn't want you to die. And you stopped that from happening," Michael said. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But now, I need to make sure they pay for what they tried to do. I want justice, not just for me, but for you too. For everyone who thinks they can be thrown away or ignored." William nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and determination. "What do you need me to do?" Michael took a deep breath. "We're going to make them think their plan worked. We'll stage an accident. Let them believe I'm dead. While they're celebrating their victory, we'll be gathering the evidence to take them down." William's eyebrows knitted together. But what if they figure it out? Michael's mouth curled into a grim smile. They won't. Their greed and arrogance will blind them. That's their weakness. That afternoon, Michael's plan was set in motion. A decoy car, an identical model to his own, was brought to a remote stretch of road. With the help of a trusted friend, they staged a crash. Flames licked at the twisted metal, black smoke curling into the sky like a serpent. News of the accident spread quickly. By evening, headlines screamed of the tragic death of Michael Whitmore, the wealthy businessman whose car had lost control on a winding road. Rachel sat on the cream-colored sofa in the living room, a handkerchief pressed to her dry eyes. The corners of her lips twitched with an emotion she barely suppressed. Beside her, Terry paced restlessly, his eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. "It worked," he muttered. "We actually did it." Rachel let out a shaky breath, the facade of grief slipping for a moment. "Yes, finally." Terry stopped pacing and knelt in front of her, his hands gripping her knees. "We're free now, Ratch. His money, his life, it's ours." She smiled, cold and triumphant. "We just have to get through the funeral. After that, we can disappear, start fresh." Hidden in the shadows of the garden, William crouched low, his heart thudding in his chest. He clutched a small recording device in his hand, the faint glow of the screen illuminating his determined face. Every word, every whispered confession was being captured, fed back to Michael, who waited in the safe house nearby. Just a little longer, William thought, his fingers trembling. He was terrified, but he couldn't stop now. They were so close to exposing everything. Later that night, William slipped back into the safe house, his face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. Michael was waiting, his eyes weary but filled with hope. "Did you get it?" Michael asked, his voice tight. William nodded, holding up the recorder. "They said everything. They think they've won." Michael took the device, his hand steady as steel. "They're about to find out just how wrong they are." He looked at William, pride shining in his eyes. "You did good, kid. Better than good. I couldn't have done this without you." William's lips curled into a small smile. "You're gonna stop them now, right?" Michael nodded, his expression hardening. "Yes, they're going to face justice for everything." The next morning, Michael walked into his mansion, flanked by 2 police officers. Rachel and Terry were seated in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, their laughter cutting off abruptly as Michael appeared in the doorway. Rachel's face drained of color. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. "No, no, this isn't possible," she whispered, her voice shaking. Terry stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. "You're dead. We saw the reports." Michael's voice was calm, cold. "Reports can be faked, just like trust." He stepped aside as the officers moved forward, handcuffing the stunned pair. Rachel's eyes filled with desperation, her mask finally shattering. "Michael, please, you have to believe me." He shook his head, his voice firm. "I believed you once, but now I believe in justice." As they were led away, Michael turned to see William standing in the doorway, his small frame lit by the morning sun. Michael walked over and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did it, William. You helped stop them." William looked up, a smile spreading across his face. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he belonged. Michael smiled back, a hint of warmth returning to his eyes. "Let's go home. You're not alone anymore." In that moment, revenge gave way to redemption. A boy who had once lived in shadows now walked toward a brighter future, one where courage and justice had triumphed over betrayal. The days following Michael's supposed death were a whirlwind of whispered condolences, orchestrated grief, and a growing sense of triumph for Rachel and Terry. The mansion, draped in somber elegance, hosted a constant flow of sympathizers. Rachel wore her black dress like armor, her face the perfect mask of widowhood, pale, reserved, and tragically beautiful. But behind closed doors, her eyes sparkled with a dangerous light. In the study, the curtains were drawn to keep out the late afternoon sun. Rachel paced the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Terry sat on Michael's leather chair, his feet propped on the desk, a smug grin on his face. Finally, Terry drawled, swirling a glass of whiskey, "We can breathe. No more waiting. No more pretending." Rachel stopped pacing and turned to him. Her eyes narrowed. "Not yet. We need to access his accounts first. The lawyers said there's a waiting period before the funds are released." Terry sighed dramatically. "Come on, Ratch. We've waited long enough. That money is ours." "It will be," Rachel snapped, her voice like a whip. "We just have to be careful. One slip-up, and all of this will be for nothing." Terry rolled his eyes, setting the whiskey glass down with a loud clink. "You worry too much. Michael's gone. The world believes it. There's nothing standing in our way now." Rachel's lips curled into a tight smile. "That's what they said about the Titanic." Terry laughed. "Well, we're not sinking, are we? We're sailing straight into the good life." Rachel glanced at a framed photograph of her and Michael on the desk. Their smiles were dazzling, their arms intertwined. A picture of happiness. She reached out and turned the photo face down, the thud echoing through the silent room. "We deserve this," she whispered. "All those years, living in his shadow, waiting for him to notice me. I refuse to be forgotten." Terry stood and wrapped his arms around her waist, his voice low and coaxing. "And you won't be. Soon, we'll be free. Rich, powerful, and far away from this place." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his confidence. "We just need to hold on a little longer." What they didn't know was that the walls had ears, and the shadows had eyes. From behind the half-closed door, William crouched, his small form hidden in the darkness of the hallway. His heart thudded in his chest, but his resolve never wavered. He clutched a recording device tightly, every word they spoke feeding into the tiny machine. "They really think they've won," he thought, a mixture of fear and determination surging through him. "They don't know what's coming." He listened as Terry continued to gloat. "I'm already looking at places on the coast," Terry said, his eyes alight with dreams of freedom. "Somewhere warm, where no one knows our names. You and me, Raksh. No more pretending." Rachel's eyes softened, a genuine smile briefly cracking her icy veneer. "It's so close I can taste it." Terry leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Just imagine it. Us, lying on a beach, sipping cocktails, laughing at how easy it all was." Rachel laughed quietly, her fingers trailing down Terry's cheek. "Michael thought he was so smart, so untouchable. He underestimated us." Terry's grin widened. And that was his biggest mistake. William's fingers clenched around the recorder. He bit his lip, fighting the urge to burst in and scream that their plan had failed, that Michael was alive. But he knew that patience was key. The web was tightening around them, and soon it would snap shut. "Just a little longer," he reminded himself. "Michael's counting on me." He crept away silently, his small form a ghost in the mansion's corridors. Every step he took felt heavier with responsibility, but he knew he was doing the right thing. That night, Rachel and Terry sat in the dimly lit dining room. The table, once a place of formal dinners and polite conversation, was now a battlefield of papers, bank statements, and passports. Terry leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "When the funds clear, we'll be gone before anyone can blink." Rachel tapped her fingers on the table, her expression thoughtful. "We need to leave no trace. No connections, no ties." Terry smirked. "No problem. By the time they figure anything out, we'll be ghosts." A silence stretched between them, filled with anticipation. Rachel raised her glass of wine, the dark liquid reflecting the low light. To us, she said softly. To freedom. Terry clinked his glass against hers. To getting what we deserve. They drank deeply, their faces lit with the glow of greed and triumph. The puppets danced, unaware that the strings they thought they held were now wrapped around their necks. In the safe house, Michael listened to the recording William had brought. Each word was a dagger, each laugh a fresh betrayal. He clenched his jaw, his hands shaking with rage and resolve. They'd really think they've won, Michael muttered, his voice low and dangerous. William looked up at him, his eyes wide but steady. They won't get away with it, right? Michael placed a reassuring hand on William's shoulder. No, they won't. They think they're in control, but they're just puppets now. He paused, his gaze hardening. And the curtain's about to fall. In the quiet of the room, the boy and the betrayed man shared a moment of understanding. Justice was close, and the puppets of greed were about to face the consequences of their twisted dance. The morning sun shone bright and unforgiving, its light slicing through the curtains of the Whitmore mansion. The air felt thick with tension, like the calm before a storm. Rachel and Terry sat at the breakfast table, an expensive spread of food before them. Neither of them touched a bite. Terry's fingers drummed impatiently against the polished wood. When are the lawyers supposed to call? His voice was edged with frustration. They said the funds would clear today. Rachel took a sip of coffee, her expression calm, though her eyes flickered with unease. They will. We just need to be patient. Terry snorted. We've been patient long enough. A loud knock on the front door shattered the stillness. They both froze. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Who could that be? Terry stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. I'll handle it. He strode to the door, his movements tense. He flung it open, expecting to see a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Instead, two police officers stood there, their expressions cold and professional. Mr. Terry Whitmore? The lead officer asked, his voice clipped. Terry's smirk faltered. Yeah. What's this about? Where's Rachel Whitmore? The officer continued. Before Terry could answer, Rachel appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion. I'm Rachel Whitmore. What's going on? The officer's gaze hardened. You're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted homicide. Rachel's face went pale, her eyes darting to Terry. What? That's ridiculous. The officer ignored her protest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Terry's face twisted with fury. This is a mistake. We didn't do anything. A new voice cut through the air like a blade. No, it's not a mistake. Michael stepped forward, his eyes cold and unyielding. The sight of him alive was a shock that hit Rachel and Terry like a physical blow. Rachel staggered back, her hands trembling. Michael, you're supposed to be dead. Michael's jaw clenched. Sorry to disappoint you. Terry's face contorted with rage. You set us up. Michael's lips curled into a humorless smile. No, you set yourselves up. Your greed blinded you, made you sloppy. And now, you'll pay for it. Rachel's voice broke. Michael, please. You have to understand. Understand what? Michael interrupted, his voice like ice. That you and my own brother plotted to kill me for money. That everything I thought we had was a lie. She reached out desperately, but Michael took a step back, disgust flashing across his face. You made your choices, Rachel. And now you'll face the consequences. Terry lunged forward, his hands curled into fists. You think you've won. You're nothing without your money, Michael. Michael didn't flinch. I'd rather have nothing than live a life built on betrayal. The officers seized Terry and Rachel, snapping handcuffs around their wrists. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as the reality of the situation crashed over her. Michael, she screamed. Please, we can fix this. We can go back. Michael shook his head, his eyes hollow. There's no going back. As the officers led them away, Terry's voice was a bitter snarl. "You haven't seen the last of us, Michael." But Michael didn't respond. He simply watched as the people he had once trusted disappeared into the back of the police cruiser. The sound of the doors slamming shut was a grim punctuation to the chapter of betrayal that was finally ending. When the house fell quiet again, Michael let out a long breath, the weight of months of deception finally lifting. He turned to see William standing at the edge of the driveway, watching everything with wide eyes. Michael walked over to him, his expression softening. "It's over, William. You did it." William shifted uncomfortably. "We did it." Michael smiled, kneeling so they were at eye level. "You saved my life. And you helped me get justice. That's not something just anyone could do." William's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I just didn't want them to win." Michael nodded, his gaze filled with gratitude. "They didn't. And they never will." He placed a hand on William's shoulder. "Listen, I meant what I said. You're not alone anymore. If you want, you can stay with me. We can figure things out together." William's throat tightened, and he wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "You mean it?" "I do," Michael said firmly. "Your family now." A smile broke across William's face, hesitant but full of hope. "I'd like that." Together, they turned toward the mansion, a house that no longer felt like a monument to emptiness, but a place where new beginnings could take root. The storm had passed, the web of greed and deceit had been torn apart, and in its place, the seeds of redemption and trust were beginning to grow. Justice had been revealed, and with it, a chance to rebuild, not just wealth, but something far more precious, a life worth living.